Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be addressing early childhood development from the psychosocial perspective. So, of course, we're going to be asking what's going on in the physical brain. We're going to go asking what's going on with them emotionally, with their motivation, with their cognitive growth. But then we're also going to be looking at the social context and asking how that structures us during early childhood development. All right. So to begin with, we're going to start talking about emotion regulation. Again, as time goes on in our lives, we're supposedly supposed to be able to gain more control over our emotions as our executive function grows and our ability to step outside the box and reflect upon things grows. And again, I will always argue that this might take an entire lifetime and even across your lifetime to any of us ever really learn to cope with what it's like to be a human. I don't know. But again, the idea of emotion regulation is that we should be able to learn to control the expression of our feelings. How good are we at this? I don't know. I'm still always struggling never to give in to my wife when she baits me. She's really good at that. She's European and very feisty. But again, ideally by about age 6, this is when kids can say things like, I feel angry or frightened or sad without completely freaking out, getting on the floor, spinning in circles, having an exorcist moment. I have videos of my 2-year-old and 3-year-old children doing that. And I always, show them occasionally. But again, by about age 6, 7, kids start to go to school, they start to interact with others, they have to learn the classroom environment, they have to, learn to be friends, they have to want to like get a toy so they can't freak out in the car, that kind of stuff. By this age, in the social context, we're all faced with these situations. And so, again, in this, section, we need to be asking, how is it by interacting in the social context do we learn about emotion regulation? So, again, we're living 365 days a year. Every time we're out interacting in the social context, we're going to a store, we're learning about how the checkout lines work. Sometimes you have to learn to be patient when you have to wait 15 and 20 minutes. How well does a toddler do that? But over time, we learn to do it. So as we encounter these situations in the social context and we're interacting with other people, this is when we're forced into situations that forces us to adapt or be dynamic or learn to interact with people in general, right? So kids realize that in order for me to get along with others, I can't constantly be freaking out and hitting and kicking them. If I keep freaking out in school, I get in trouble with the teacher. If I throw temper tantrums, my parents don't give me what we want. So again, as they face all these situations, they learn to deal with their emotions in a way that is socially acceptable. And again, that's a key word. We all conform our emotional expressions to the norms of society. And again, that's very culturally different. Think about funerals and what's the proper way to mourn, in the United States versus a different country. You know what I mean? So again, every culture has its own form of what's acceptable and what's not, but then kids then internalize this. That's the cognitive side. We internalize the social norms. We internalize how to use our words to describe how we're feeling to other people to get what we want, or because we're not getting what we want, or whatever reason it is that we're having a lot of feelings on that day. Okay. Variations in inborn temperament do make emotion regulation easier. Again, this idea of the biology of our personality, the biology of our temperament, and do our feelings have a biological basis? Of course, we all have this predetermined kind of set of expressions that are genetically influenced, but then we also are highly influenced by how society tells us we're allowed to express those feelings. So again, we all have that genetic personality or genetic you, not personality, that was the wrong word, because again, personality is like your temperament plus all your experiences and all that. So you have that genetic temperament, that basic you, like the true self or your inborn self or your like raw self or however you want to describe that, your genetic self. We all have that. And so how emotional we are at 2 is highly influenced by our genetic temperament. But again, as we get molded by other people, we have to mold all temperaments in society to get everybody to kind of, be socialized in such a way that they conform to the norm. So again, no matter what your temperament is, at some point you'll have to conform to the group to be able to get along with them and be able to express yourselves in the way you want to do. But again, genetic differences, attachment patterns, trauma, different socialization, all of this influences how you respond to situations, how you deal with your emotions, both internally and externally, and then how you regulate your emotions. The book gets into three major factors associated with emotion regulation. Maturation. Again, emotion regulation grows and improves every year as we interact in the social context and we are confronted by social situations, and we have to learn to cope. We have to learn to get along in this world. So again, we adapt quickly. We're like little sponges. We figure out the rules, we figure out the lingo, we figure out how we're supposed to dress, walk, talk, eat, all these things, and then we learn to play the rules. And when we're freaking out on the inside and we're at our job, we learn that it's unprofessional to spaz out, and you know what I mean? And so that's the idea of emotion regulation, right? When you're an adult and some customers freaking out at you and you're like a server in a restaurant, you just kind of have to take that. You can't like yell back because you're the server in a restaurant. You're not really allowed. The customer's always right, right? Again, that's the idea. And then we learn. Children learn from mentors who offer tactics for managing emotions. Who are the agents of socialization that are highly structuring you and kids in society in general? Again, society being groups of people made up of individuals, right? So we are socialized by society, these groups of people, and the individuals that make up those groups on how to talk, walk, eat in a way and be express our emotions in a way that's socially appropriate. And again, culture. So again, in some cultures, you want to kiss someone, you kiss them, and in other cultures, kissing is not acceptable. You know what I mean? So you might have a feeling like you want to kiss that person, but in some places you can't. So think about that. So again, culture will structure, are you supposed to be timid, shy, humble? Should you bow? Should you look strong? Should you be arrogant? Should you act like a jock? Should you act like a nerd? Yeah. All right. All right. Your book did hit on some cool things in that emotions are infectious. Again, that theory of mind is we are always wondering how other people are feeling. We're trying to put ourselves in their heads to see how they're feeling. And by doing that, we and ourselves feel things too. So we all do respond off of each other. And so your book's quote is mothers and children regulate or deregulate each other. I wonder why the father's not in that quote. That was my first thought. But again, it's from the book. I put it in there, and then again, it should be, just questioning it. Why not Dad's book? Little bias, whatever. Just tossing that out there. But again, the idea is our ability to share our emotions and work off of each other benefits us because, again, we are social beings who need each other. We get dopamine, we get serotonin, oxytocin whenever we have these good, positive, awesome social exchanges. So, again, the idea of working off each other. Your book says that, responding to a child's joy decreases cortisol, which is the stress hormone. So again, if you have joy and laughter, less stress. And then it increases these endorphins, these neurotransmitters that make you feel good. So again, if you guys look at the neuroscience of, how going running, causes neurotransmitters, chemicals in your brain to be released. That's what makes you feel good. Dopamine in your brain. Look at like how getting a hug releases oxytocin, in your brain. You guys need to understand that as psychology students for also. And then there's this idea of effortful, it's a hard word, effortful control. Effort for control is as this prefrontal cortex grows, as our executive functioning grows, our ability to regulate our emotions, think about the situation, ask ourselves how I should act, this grows, okay? Our impulses, we can structure those better. We don't always just go and be impulsive, right? So it also says, though, this can be more difficult. Again, just developing in general can be more difficult when people are tired or hungry or maybe existing in poverty or, lacking a good education or quality mentors or quality socialization, right? So again, a kid learning emotional regulation, a lot of that is just learning the rules of society and then learning how to exist as a brain inside of your body, which is not easy. Like we just expect kids to be like perfect and not freak out and have it all figured out right away, right? No, this like especially during this early development, 2 to 6 to 8 up to 10. this is the time where everyone's trying on these shoes. We're trying on our emotions for the first time. We're figuring out what kind of a person we are and how we want to express ourselves, right? So again, effort for control, emotion regulation, all of this grows with our executive functioning, okay? And so the book says that all of these things overlap. As you go out in the world and experience more things, this part of your brain grows, the connections of your brain grow, and you start to figure out, your signals coming from your limbic system for your emotions that are going to your, prefrontal cortex and your conscious mind. That communication is getting easier. So again, you're better able to figure out like, how am I feeling? Limbic system, what are you trying to tell me? That kind of thing, okay? So executive functioning emphasizes cognition, this ability to think and reflect and consider our emotions and the situation and why is my unconscious mind wanting me to feel these feelings consciously and what does it want me to think about? Okay, all of this are these processes that are happening. Your book then gets into initiative versus guilt. Again, initiative plays a huge role because as we go out in the world and have these experiences, that's how we learn to develop. But what happens if you don't go out and develop? What happens if you don't take the initiative and go out in the world? And again, that's kind of where you get into the area of less brain growth. Yeah. So when it comes to emotion regulation, the book talks about how this is Erikson's third developmental stage, initiative versus guilt. But then it hits on this interesting thing, saying that all of Erikson's stages are really just these internal processes of growth. As we go through these internal processes and try to figure out how to live in the world, that's when we go through these stages to become an adult. And then once we're an adult, we're supposed to have gotten through all these stages. We're able to go out in the world confidently, seeking out stimuli, doing all this really cool stuff. Yeah. So initiative includes saying something new, beginning a project, expressing an emotion. Again, just going out into the world. The book also hits on pride. Again, at what point do we become self-centered, arrogant, super overconfident humans? And then at what point do we get over that and become super humble, kind, altruistic kinds of people? And again, kids go through this process, right? But again, as we go out in the world and we begin to believe in ourselves, and the voice in our head is always telling ourselves, like, good job on that exam, or you're so smart, or you could jump really far today when you did the long jump and track against those seventh graders, right? We're always building this sense of self-efficacy, self-esteem. And so, again, we always need to check that with humility. And the book talks about this as almost a natural progression. And it says by about 7, kids learn as well as adults that modesty is probably better than boasting and being an arrogant, braggadocious person all the time. But again, if you study Goffman's, theories of impression management, that we're all actors on a stage, we're always trying to highlight these really cool parts about ourselves so people like us, like, look at my muscles, look at my shoe size. We do this kind of stuff. All right. But again, we do also get through this humble part, which is why kids at 7 are always so nice, right? The temper tantrums are over. They're just out there hanging out with each other, playing, I don't know. Motivation, again, is a psychological process this book gets into, and it breaks it down into both intrinsic and extrinsic. And again, I always think internal, I, intrinsic has an I. That's how I remember it. So again, whenever we're looking at motivation that comes from the inside, that's your intrinsic motivation. And then any motivation that's coming from out here, I can't see my hand, out here in the social world, I'm trying to make a big circle, but we're not in a classroom, so you can see my hands. That's the external motivation. So think about internal motivation. Just think about it like this. Why are you in college? Think about it for you personally. What is it? Is it because you want to do something you like? You're really interested in this subject? Those are the internal reasons. And then the external reasons are you live in a capitalist America that's divided into social classes. And if you don't have high socioeconomic status, you're going to have less access to healthcare, other resources, so you need piles of money. So again, that's the external extrinsic. But again, the book hits on, internal motivation is a powerful force because this is the voice in our head. This is us inside of our head developing who we're going to be, right? So again, we go out and we create scripts, we play with our toys, we're just gonna do that self-play, we have imaginary friends. 1 in 5 kids have imaginary friends. So a lot of the time is spent in our head. and we're asking ourselves, what should we do? How many, isn't that what you kind of do your whole life every day? Okay, what next? Oh, I need to go to work. Okay, what next? Oh, I'm gonna need to get some food. Okay, what next? I'm gonna go learn about Sherlock Holmes and read 1,000 pages of every story he's ever written. Yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. I'm on 750. I have two books left. But again, why am I reading Sherlock Holmes? Why am I seeking that out? Is it because I'm a human and I'm drawn to seek out stimuli and I have this internal motivation that wants more? All right, so young kids, as with all of us, and again, does this decrease with time? I don't know. You can ask that. I mean, you can look at hyper little children running around a play park and then your grandparents and ask. Eh. But maybe your grandparents just should not have stopped playing. If they kept playing, they would have just been like those kids. That's another side of it. But this is only, we're not in full developmental psychology for this class. We're only in, 0 to like 19. But kids have this powerful urge to play, explore, and go out and achieve. Okay. So intrinsic motivation is apparent when kids invent dialogue for their toys, again, concentrate on creating a work of art or architecture, or just again, conversing with imaginary companions. An external motivation is when we do things for praise from outside or some other form of external reward, people liking us, piles of money, a toy, whatever it might be. So again, play is incredibly important for kids. And I have been lecturing on this for adults for a long time too. Like I've gone to many conferences and talked about the importance of play for college students and adults. Again, like play is a way for us to go out and learn. And so again, if we use play to go try on new shoes, to go learn new skills, that's like more fun than just having someone lecture to you. Like, listen to me, I'm just lecturing you. Wouldn't it be more fun if we were out like playing basketball and talking about this kind of stuff? So right now, maybe you should put on some headphones and go for a run and then listen, and maybe it'll be a little more fun because we're having fun and we're playing and we're learning. And will that help actually get more stuff into your long-term memory? It will, because again, if you study memory, that's what you find, things that are more important to you, or if you're having a good time or whatever it might be, that's the stuff that really sticks with you. But what the book really stresses that's important is kids need kids. Like you can sit here all day and act like an adult can fill that role, but they cannot fill that role. They can kind of fill that role, but they really cannot fill that role like you think they can. So again, the book hits on this idea in America these days, we don't have a lot of kids. So I mean, I'm constantly hitting up people, and it's weird because you're like a dad in modern times. Like this used to be inappropriate, but I'm constantly like hitting up moms, like, "Hey, are your kids able to play?" And I mean, I feel awkward as hell because I'm like a man. Is that my role? Does it deviate from gender norms, etc.? But again, really cool questions to ask. Not really for this discussion. But kids need other kids, people of their same age and status. Okay, so again, even infants, although they're intrigued by children, they can't play either. So adults and infants are kind of locked out. All right. But again, from age 2 to 6, most kids learn how to join a peer group. This teaches them how to manage conflict, get along with other people, take turns, make friends, find new friends, and keep the action going, is how the book described it. And I liked it. Because again, we are social creatures. And so it's this childhood where we can go out and interact. This is how we learn how to become friends. You don't just magically be born into this world. We're like animals. We'll like bite and kick. Look at kids and preschoolers. We have to learn to be friends, okay? But at the downside, during early childhood, children who have fewer friends tend to have this tendency to be more immature with lower in social and executive skills. And I need to go look in that more specifically because I really want to look at the research for how they're making that kind of a judgment. That's important. But then your book gets into the types of play, risky, rough and tumble, and socio-dramatic. And then it also looks at solitary, kids playing on their own, and onlooker, kids watching others, parallel, they're next to each other playing, but they're not doing it together. Associative, they're interacting but not taking turns, and then cooperative. And then it breaks it down by age and stage at which we learn it. So again, by about age 5 and especially about age 7, kids are much better at sharing, creating dramas, creating rules together. I mean, just listen to your kids or just any kids. Half their time is spent establishing the rules. I don't even think they actually ever play the game. I mean, they spend all the time just discussing the rules, okay? For parenting styles, you guys have probably been getting this for years. So again, authoritarian parent is the word is law. You're going to do what I say. Permissive parent, the opposite, go do whatever you want. Authoritative parent is you give them some guidance, but then you also kind of kick them out of the house a little bit and let them try to figure it out on their own. And then you have neglectful or uninvolved parenting where you're just completely absent to the point where it could be considered abusive. That's when you get into the neglectful. Okay. How we parent our kids is highly influenced by culture, discipline levels, physical punishment. You know, think about different cultures. I think about this when I teach child abuse. Okay, so when you look at rates of child abuse, blacks, whites, Hispanics tend to have the same amounts of abuse. Asians never hit their kids. What up? Or, are they just better at hiding it or something like that? But again, like, is, corporal punishment influenced by culture, But again, do we just do what our parents do? How do we learn to be parents? We look around us, and then the other part of it is your temperament, So we all have our basic temperament, our basic, how we're going to treat our kids on the inside, but then how we treat our kids and how we raise their kids is highly structured by, again, the socio-cultural environment and how we're taught to raise their kids, what's acceptable, what's not. But again, the survey found that 72% of parents in modern times still think it's okay to hit your kids. Because when you study reinforcement versus punishment, punishment doesn't teach kids anything. If anything, the only thing they really learn is how to avoid punishment. It's through reinforcement that you teach the kids the behaviors that you want them to have. So again, if the kids aren't doing what you're doing, how do you get them to learn the behaviors you want them to do? That's the harder step, okay? It did say in the United States, kids, though, that are physically punished are more likely to be disobedient, bullies in school, lawbreakers in adolescent, and violent in adulthood. But again, I want to look specifically at their studies before I make all these kinds of conclusions. Here's some more conclusions the authors came to. Children of authoritarian parents tend to be conscientious, obedient, but quite unhappy. They said they're more likely to be depressed and internalize frustration. What up? Children of permissive parents, they say, tend to lack self-control. But is that really true? I mean, do all children of permissive parents, like, are they just alcoholic, binge drinking, cocaine, sex freaks? I mean, okay. So again, you got to ask, always question the research. Children of authoritative parents tend to be successful, articulate, happy with themselves. I mean, are they kind of biased? Really? Everyone that had like these great parents that guided them and kind of helped them find their way. They're the perfect kids. And then children of neglectful, uninvolved parents tend to be immature, sad, and lonely, higher rates of injury and abuse. And if you look at some of the studies, what are you going to find? Now, to wrap this all up, at this age, sex and gender becomes pretty prominent. By age 5, kids know what kind of gender they are. I have many lectures on sex and gender, so please, I'm not going to go super deep into this. Just go look on my YouTube playlist, type in sex and gender. In my intro to sociology classes, sex and gender. Race and ethnicity is sex and gender. My psychology of sexuality class, sex and gender. Intro to psychology, I have chapters on sex and gender. Goes on for days. In all my lectures, I always take a biopsychosocial approach. But first, we got to get the definition right. Sex is biological traits. Gender is supposed to be cultural traits. But as I've learned more, your gender and how you identify, the categories you identify with are influenced by how you feel on the inside. You just can't help how you feel. So, females XX, males XY. Does this influence different behaviors in childhood? That is kind of unknown because the puberty cycle hasn't hit in yet. So again, this conversation for when you have brain differences, hormone differences, gonad differences, almost has to come a little bit later when it comes to sex differences. Okay, so again, are 7 and year old boys and girls actually are their bodies working any different? Is a really cool question. And I lean toward more like no. Neither is their brains. But when they hit puberty, again, that's when things like hormones, I wrote it all out, chromosomes, genitalia, hormones, reproductive parts, gonads, these start to play a role. And they also start to play a role in the brain. And yes, if you look at some of my lectures, there are some tiny little differences in the male and female brains if the brain actually has a sex. And even we don't know if there's a male or female brain, okay? So you can say it more like, a brain put into the body of a male versus a brain put into the body of a female. There are a little bit of hormonal differences, but does that really affect behavior that much? There's some white matter differences, but does that really affect behavior that much? Girls tend to have more emotionally developed centers and boys visual spatial. But does it really affect behavior that much? And so what you can say is society though really does affect behavior also. And again, it's nature nurture, so nothing that I'm talking about can really be proven, disproven. It's all kind of theory and probability and is it weighing more toward this and weighing more toward that, you know? And that's kind of where we're at. But the gender socialization process is very strong. So before you're even born, right? You are already being socialized. Your parents are picking out the colors for your room, the clothes you're going to get. They talk to you differently. And the second you are born, they treat you differently. They talk you differently. They dress you differently. They introduce you to different activities. And it is highly suggested that this is what creates most of the differences between males and females. So, sex, biological traits. We're talking chromosomes, genitalia, hormones, reproductive parts, and gonads. Are there differences? And then gender is supposed to be these social cultural traits of how we express ourselves and then how we do gender. So, what norms do you conform to? But again, if you look at humans versus other species, human males and females are very similar compared to like other species that tend to have major, major differences. And your book goes through it looking at psychodynamic behaviorism, cognitive, socioculture, and evolutionary theory, just to give you some stepping stones and from where to talk about sex and gender. So this is a really good place to wrap it up. But again, if you're interested, just watch all my videos on sex and gender. I have dozens of them. My PhD is in the psychology of gender and sexuality. I have pages of stuff in my head, but I don't want to bore you. Psychodynamic theory is going to look at unconscious processes associated with the way we think and behave. So again, the unconscious brain, the neuroscience of the brain, is there a male versus female brain? And does that influence the way we think and behave? Okay. All right. Behaviorism is looking at stimulus and response. When a girl tries to wear a tuxedo to prom, what do? You know, we shun you, we stigmatize you, we try to socially control you. And so by stimulus and response, girls learn what? Oh, I'm supposed to wear a dress and long hair and makeup to go to prom because that's what's acceptable. That's behaviorism. We learn to do gender by interacting in the world and figuring out what works and what doesn't. And again, cognitive theory, again, using your thoughts, asking yourself, how am I supposed to act? Observing, imitating others. Oh, I found out I have this physical thing. That means I'm a boy, so I'm supposed to act like this. How do boys act? And then we start acting like that, right? Socioculture, again, observing, modeling, imitating. There's going to flow just from cognitive into sociocultural because, again, it's the social context that molds our thoughts. So it's the social context that teaches us what is the proper way to think about how I'm supposed to be dressing today. And then evolutionary psychology looks at how over time our bodies work and our brains work and natural selection. And it's going to ask questions like, why are males bigger? You know, so what in the environment made it so males were bigger? And most, psychologists would say males are bigger because males have to fight each other for access to females and other things in the wild. Lately, I've been asking, why did girls lose most of their hair on their bodies, but boys kept more? I haven't got an answer to that question yet. But again, is that through like natural selection, right? Like maybe humans decided that less hairy women are more attractive, and so hairy women didn't breed as much as less hairy women, and so less hairy women bred more. Or is that just a theory, right? But that's the silliness, right? Why do we act this way? Is it built into us to divide and stratify into genders and divide into groups? Or is it a sociocultural process where we do that for you? All right. Well, I hope this was interesting. Again, check out some of those videos to go deeper, though, into the sex and gender. Okay, great.